What's up, everybody? Hope you're doing well. I want to give my first round draft pick analysis from last night. And then I want to talk about a list of teams that did well, picked good players, made good trades. And then there's two teams that I thought kind of did 50-50, maybe made one good pick, and then the other one was questionable. And then I'll end with four players that I thought either are valuable or gained value in fantasy football last night. But first, who did the best last night? Philadelphia Eagles did. To trade from 9 to 10 and give the Bears a fourth round pick and be able to get Jalen Carter, who's viewed as the most talented, productive player in the draft at a position of value, is big. Now you pair him with Jordan Davis, and then the Eagles also picked, how does this happen? How do they do this? They also picked Nolan Smith at 31 last night, defensive end. He's a little bit smaller, but he can bend. That was a guy that was projected. I've seen him in the top 10 for some mocks, right around that. But either way, their defensive line, not only with high-end players, but being able to rotate players is so good. Good luck to the rest of the league. I don't know how you stop that. The other team that stood out to me last night that made a really good deal, Arizona Cardinals. Did not expect them to make good decisions. So they traded back from pick 3 last night to 12. So they got a 12th in the first round this year. They have a second coming up tonight from the Texans. And then they also took the Texans' first round pick and third round pick for next year. That was killer. That's a team that definitely will not be competing this year for a playoff spot. Probability is not in their favor. And they needed a volume of picks because they have needs all over the place. Every side of the ball, both lines, everywhere. So that was a really, really good deal for them. And then for them to pick Paris Johnson, maybe they picked him a little bit early, but I'm okay with that. You got to protect your quarterback, and you got to get a left tackle. So comfortable with what they did last night. Very happy with how they added a ton of assets in draft picks. Seattle Seahawks did pretty well last night. They took the best cornerback, and that was good. But really, the value came at pick 20 when they picked Jackson Smith-Njigba. How did he fall that far? In a league that's going smaller at receiver, and in a league that is valuing separating quickly rather than spending so much draft capital on an alpha X receiver, that's big, man. And he doesn't have to play right away, but he probably will. I mean, that's a good spot for him, so good for Seattle. Bears, another team that I like them flipping back and getting another pick, understanding where they're at, understanding that they are probably the least talented roster in the NFL prior to the draft trade with Carolina. So they needed a ton of players, ton of picks, and they also got a left tackle last night. Totally satisfied with what they've done this offseason. I thought they've done a great job. Colts, I like that they're taking a swing at Anthony Richardson. If you're going to take a swing at a quarterback, make sure he has high-end ability. He does have that. You didn't always see that consistently at Florida, but that's somebody that has high-end playoff and Super Bowl type outcomes. It's going to be a while before that's going to be realized, and I pretty certainly understand that. Gardner Minshew is their starting quarterback, so they can groom Anthony Richardson a little bit, but he can also compete at the same time. So really like that from the Colts. Bengals, picking at the back of the first round, grabbing Myles Murphy, absolute athletic freak from Clemson, defensive end. Didn't always get the production you'd like to see, but they got somebody high-end at defensive end. So I like that a lot for them. Steelers, this was one I really liked. They jumped in front of the Jets to take the last high-end left tackle in the draft. Good for them. Bucks taking Quincy Kalaja, defensive tackle from Pittsburgh, ultra productive. He had 0 visits in the top 30 for the draft with teams. Generally, when people are visiting with a player, they have questions. To me, that says they didn't have any questions about this player. So, interesting. And then lastly, the Saints taking Brian Bresee, defensive tackle, late in the first round. This was a guy that was rated as the number one overall prospect. I think coming out of high school and even at Clemson, he was pretty highly regarded. He had some circumstances. He lost his sister to cancer during this time period, I believe, and had some other things happen. So he couldn't completely focus on football. But as far as the human being and being talented, he's very good. So that was a good pick for them. All right, two teams that I thought made one good pick and then made a shitty pick or decision. Texans, we talked about that a little bit ago. C.J. Stroud, that was the right pick at quarterback. For me, he would be the guy that I would pick number one overall, but for them to get him at number two, very good. What I didn't like was the volume of picks in the high draft capital that they gave up for Willie Anderson. Knowing that you're not going to make the playoffs this year, maybe not next year, and they should make multiple bets in draft capital, and they should have spread their bets around to fill not only starter needs but depth needs. I like the player Willie Anderson a lot. Somebody had 200 quarterback pressures in 3 years at Alabama. I mean, that's just insane. So, I mean, I like the player a lot. I just didn't like the volume of picks that they gave up and these high leverage picks. So, that's okay. Detroit Lions. The first one was a head scratcher. Jamar Gibbs. Like that prospect too. Maybe Jamal Charles light in ability. Doesn't really run between the tackles as well as you'd like him to, but he catches a lot of balls out of the backfield. What's confusing for me is they paid David Montgomery a lot of money in the offseason, and they have DeAndre Swift, who they clearly don't value. But either way, to give Montgomery money and bring Gibbs in, a little bit confusing, but okay. But really what was the thing that bothered me the most was picking him at 12, knowing that you could probably get him more closer to 20, into the 20s, most likely. So their other pick, Campbell at linebacker, I liked that. I thought that was a good pick, but a little bit surprising on both picks. And then lastly, fantasy football. So there are 4 guys that are either valuable, and I'm not talking about Superflex, just regular dynasty, that are valuable or gained a little bit from their landing spot. Bijan Robinson going top 8. That's huge draft capital to spend on a running back. Tyler Algier had a good season last year, and he was ultra productive at BYU. But Bijan coming in, he's probably going to get the majority of the workload. They generally haven't passed 2 running backs in the past. That will change. So he should be your 101 in all formats. Maybe not super flex, but I would take him 101 because it's just something that this league has gone to is, for workload for running backs, distributing that evenly. If you get somebody who's a bell cow or is going to get a high volume of the percentages snaps, you take him at running back. Even though that their shelf life is shorter compared to receivers, I value him the most. So, next, Chargers taking Quentin Johnston. That was big. I was concerned that they were going to take Jackson Smith and Jigba, and that we'd see Justin Herbert get a lot of his passes knocked down at the line of scrimmage like he usually does. So it's cool that they took a real alpha receiver, maybe the only real alpha receiver in this draft. That's a good pairing for fantasy. So he should not necessarily year one see high volume, but eventually he's going to see high volume with a high-end quarterback. Dalton Kincaid, somebody that I really liked at Utah. He almost had 1,000 yards receiving this past year at Utah. Unbelievable. Now you're pairing him with Josh Allen. I get some Travis Kelce vibes from the receiving perspective from Dalton Kincaid. I'm a little concerned that he's an older prospect. I think he's 24. Generally, you want to see these guys break out at younger ages. But in the age of COVID, you've got to make the adjustments accordingly. The other thing is he doesn't block well. That can be taught. And then lastly, Jordan Addison going to the Minnesota Vikings. Keep in mind, last year, they passed on Jameson Williams. They actually traded back with the Lions got more draft picks and let the Lions take Jameson Williams. So that says a lot to me that they would take Jordan Addison at this point. He was ultra productive, not this past season, but the season before when he played at Pittsburgh with Kenny Pickett. He had over 1,500 yards receiving. Last year, he transferred to USC and played with Caleb Williams. I think he was a little under 1,000 yards for the year, but his tape looks pretty good. Athletically, he's okay, but as a number 2 in that offense, as far as receiver goes, that's a pretty good spot for him. So that's all I got. If you have questions, I'd love to hear them. I'd like to hear your takes too.